Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor Shi Wang. Shi Wang is a distinguished professor of genetics and evolution, and we're going to be talking about the origins of the out of Africa hypothesis. So, Professor Shi Wang, for some time now you have been criticizing that perspective out of Africa. Explain what is the out of Africa hypothesis. Some of us might know, some of us may not know. What is it?
Okay, so this is a hypothesis about the origin of Homo sapiens, or also called modern humans, or AMH, anatomically modern humans. So it is not about the Homo species. The Homo species is widely accepted to have originated in Africa about 2.5 million years ago. And then about 2 million years ago, Homo erectus migrated out of Africa into Eurasia and has been in Eurasia for 2 million years. And the question is, when did Homo sapiens uh, evolve and where? So, out of Africa is about the origin of these modern humans. They look almost exactly like us today. So, there are two main hypotheses regarding the origin of modern humans. One is multi-regional hypothesis. The other is the out of Africa hypothesis. Multi-regional suggests that different regions have independently evolved modern humans more than one time. And out of Africa is a single origin hypothesis, proposing that modern humans first evolved in South Africa, Sub-Sahara Africa, about 100,000 years ago. And then they started migrating into Eurasia about 50,000 years ago. And it was primarily based on genetic evidence, genetic diversity data. And the fossil data are not as strong. And the fossils could also be interpreted to support alternative hypotheses.
Shi
Yeah,
Wang,
that's about.
good, good. I'm happy that you broke down the point. So there's a difference between where human life emerged and where modern humans emerged, as you explained earlier. Because some people don't appreciate these differences. Because when they hear about out of Asia hypothesis, they assume that we emerged out of Asia, modern humans, the people who look like us. Good. So you simplify that for the audience. Tell us about recent evidence because for the past few days now you have been touting recent evidence from a scientific journal to explain your thesis or to provide more evidence for this argument. Up to yesterday or probably the day before, I was reading an article that was published in a prestigious journal and you quoted it online.
So you're talking about evidence in support of out of
Yes,
Africa
yes.
or
No
out of
evidence
East
in
Asia?
support of East Asia because for the as I said over the past few days you have been tweeting this one article quite frequently.
Oh, so basically, we do not think the out of Africa hypothesis is valid. We believe an alternative hypothesis, that is, out of East Asia, may be more correct. And the problem with the out of Africa hypothesis is mainly the premise for understanding genetic diversity is no longer valid. The premise has been the neutral theory and the strict molecular clock hypothesis. This theory interprets genetic diversity in terms of time of evolution. So it's kind of intuitive. The longer the time of evolution, the higher the genetic distance or the higher the genetic diversity. And the sub-Saharan Africans happen to have the highest genetic diversity among people on Earth. So this was interpreted to mean a longer evolutionary time and hence an origin in sub-Saharan Africa. But this interpretation is based on the neutral theory to be correct. And we now know that the neutral theory has been disproven many, many times. Since the 1990s, leading experts already write papers with the title that the neutral theory is dead. And more recent data, more recent paper, like you mentioned a few days ago, is about more direct experimental test of the neutral theory and soundly disprove it. Therefore, genetic diversity has to be interpreted by an alternative framework. We have come up with that framework like in 2008 called the maximum genetic diversity theory. So basically, when you see genetic distance or genetic diversity, you have two choices to interpret that distance. The distance is measured by protein sequence or gene sequence identity. The distance increases with time indefinitely. That's one interpretation, which is the neutral theory or the strict molecular clock. The other alternative is that the distance has already reached saturation, a maximum plateau point. So it's no longer related to time. And it's independent of time. It's related to something else. We found it's related to organismal complexity. So, then the higher genetic diversity of human populations today, we can show it's all at the maximum stage, maximum diversity stage, no longer increasing with time as assumed by the neutral theory. So if we overthrow the neutral theory, then the out of Africa hypothesis automatically collapses.
All right. Maximum genetic diversity theory. So I've been browsing through some of your articles and posts. And when I say posts, I'm not talking about Twitter posts, but posts on your academic website. What's the implication of genetic diversity? Because I remember reading one of your pieces once, and you were examining the relationship between diversity and complexity, societal complexity. So, is diversity a negative or a positive?
Yeah, genetic diversity is measured by DNA sequence differences, distances, the identity matrix. So high genetic diversity means higher DNA sequence non-identity among people or among species. So genetic diversity can be thought of as standard deviation of errors, errors from the ideal dimensions of a building part. So DNA is like a building parts, and it's like any machinery building parts. It has a tolerance of random errors, but the tolerance is not unlimited. It has a limitation. The higher precision the building parts, the lower the amount of random errors it can tolerate. So lower genetic diversity. So it means higher complexity and ordered organisms should have lower genetic diversity.
All right. And now, comment on East Asians. How is this related to societal complexity in East Asians? Are East Asians a highly diverse group, limited diversity? Because I do remember you writing about diversity in the
Well,
context of Asia.
East Asians generally have lower genetic diversity, and Africans have higher genetic diversity. And Europeans are in between.
All right. This is the article that you posted and that I browsed. I was looking on my phone because I wanted to share the name of the article. On oncogenic HPV types identified in Paleolithic and Chalcolithic human genome sequencing data.
Mm-hmm.
That's the article. You cited it a few days
Right,
ago,
that was
and
like
yes, tell
a
us
very
about this
recent article.
article. Yes, please do.
Uh, so, uh, so this article says that this oldest European human ancient DNA, that's Wus Ishim, it's 45,000 years old, and it's found in Western Russia. And it has been known before that its DNA look more like Asians, South Asians. So it's surprising it doesn't look like Europeans. So that data actually support the out of East Asia hypothesis of modern human origins. So this Asian DNA may just come out of East Asia into Europe. So this recent paper on HPV-16 found that this ancient DNA carried the haplotype A4 of the virus. And this A4 type virus is common in East Asia, but not in Europe or anywhere else. So this further supports the idea that this ancient human is from Asia. So I cited this as evidence for the out of East Asia theory.
Okay, then, but this is my question. Why is the East Asia, why is the out of East Asia theory controversial? Because for some time now, I have been seeing new lines of evidence debunking or claiming to debunk the out of Africa hypothesis. So, why are academics so unwilling to embrace this new paradigm?
Well, this is about a paradigm shift and about scientific revolution. And for this type of scientific revolution, it is not about scientific truth per se. Even if you are right, it may still take 20 to 30 years for other people to acknowledge it, to accept it. And if you look at the history of scientific revolution, that's the common pattern, that new truths will take many, many years to become widely accepted. And right now, the out of East Asia theory is still relatively a new paradigm. We published it in 2017. And people has been generally ignoring it, has not engaged with it in terms of discussing its merits in comparing it to out of Africa model. So we're still at the early stage of a paradigm shift. And it's not surprising that the out of East Asia theory has not been widely discussed or accepted yet.
All right, then. Again, so I'm on goldengenomon.com. This is your website. And on the website, you list some recent updates. And I'm going to share one update with the audience, and I would love for you to comment. This is from 2017. It's a preprint. Denisovans are Africans! In exclamation. A PNAS paper found that Denisovans were phenotypically archaic Africans, confirming our conclusion using informative DNA in our 2017 preprint.
That's right.
Yes. I would love
So
if you could expound first on the name of this paper's candidate Denisovan fossils identified through gene regulatory phenotyping.
yeah, let me explain it. This PNS paper discussed, presented data from a method that predicted phenotypes based on genomic DNA. As you well know, that Denisovans humans were first identified by genomic sequencing without skull or without any fossils. So we don't really know what Denisovan look like. And then this group developed a method that they can predict certain facial phenotypes based on genomic DNA. And based on this prediction, they successfully predicted the Harbin skull of China belonged to Denisovan. And this was recently confirmed by sequencing of the Harbin skull, showing indeed the Harbin skull is Denisovan. So this proves that this method from the PNS paper is very convincing, very valid. And interestingly, this paper also identified an African skull fossil from sub-Saharan Africa, a place called Kabwe or Broken Hill. And so this skull called Kabwe is also identified by this method as a Denisovan. So this is, quite interesting. So suggesting Asian skull found in China actually look like an African fossil, an African human, or it's an archaic African. Okay, and prior to this, in 2017, we have analyzed the Denisovan DNA. We used slowly evolving DNA, which we believe are more informative to phylogenetic analysis and are more neutral. So we identified Denisovan as most similar to Africans among all people. So we claim that Denisovan may be African, not Chinese. So even though they are found in East Asia, but they look like African in DNA sequence. And so this PNS paper independently confirmed our DNA conclusion by providing phenotypic data. So that was exciting.
All right, good. There's another paper. I don't remember if you were the one who cited it somewhere, but I am familiar with this paper, so I'm going to read the name of the article and you can comment if you read it, because sometimes I do my own research on, well, usually I do my own research on topics, but sometimes you quote articles and then I look them up. So this was one article that I have on my phone. Homo sapiens specific evolution unveiled by ancient Southern African genomes. Was that one of the articles that you quoted on Twitter recently?
Could you repeat that name
Okay, let me
again?
repeat it. Homo sapiens specific evolution unveiled by ancient Southern African genomes.
I don't recall reading this
Okay,
paper. Sorry.
okay, it's all right, because sometimes you cite, I read a lot of articles. I was wondering if you
Well,
were.
when was this article? published.
This was recently published in Nature 2025 in December, the 3rd of December.
No, I'm not familiar with this somehow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Homo sapiens evolved hundreds of thousands of years ago in Africa, later spreading across the globe, but the early evolutionary process is debated. Here we present whole genome sequencing data for 28 Asian Southern African individuals. All Asian Southern Africans dated to
Oh
more
yeah,
than
I think I remember it now. Yeah, so they presented ancient DNA from Africans in sub-Saharan Africa. The DNA age is about 8,000 years old, and they showed these ancient DNA are very genetically diverse and even more diverse than people today. So I think this doesn't make sense in terms of the molecular clock, which says the more time the evolution, the higher the genetic diversity. So we would expect Africans today should have higher genetic diversity than Africans in the past. And so this is the opposite of what this paper found. And so another point is that by having higher genetic diversity in ancient Africans, we have to push back the time to the most recent common ancestor, even further back. And so this would invalidate the timing of the origin for the modern human people based on calculations based on present day genetic diversity. So the inconsistency is bad for this story.
molecular clock. Explain that again, please. That's an important topic. So be as
Okay,
simple.
molecular clock. It was proposed in the early 1960s based on observed genetic distance data among species. Genetic distance is measured by protein sequence identity. So they noticed a correlation between genetic distance and time of separation during evolution. So they proposed the idea that different species have similar mutation rates or substitution rates, okay, based on that observation. The implicit assumption they made without even discussing it is that the distance they observe are still linearly increasing with time. It's not, they assume it's not a maximum distance. So that's the molecular clock. That turned out to be wrong. The distance is actually, as we found out in recent years, the distance we observe today are mostly at the maximum saturation. It's independent of time. So, so that was a major mistake of the molecular clock. And plus, proof for the idea that the molecular clock is wrong is that when people actually compared more sequences in recent years, they found out that, in fact, different species have very different mutation rates. So directly disproven the molecular clock hypothesis.
Yes, you had an interesting debate with Professor Doug C. Wallace some time ago. It's
Yeah,
on your blog,
right,
goldengenome.blogspot.
right.
Molecular clock not real. Wallace reply, and my rebuttal. Dear Doug Wallace. So you responded.
Yeah. So Doug Wallace was one of the authors on the very early paper on modern human origins. They had a paper in 1983. This was a paper by the group from Stanford. The professor name was a well-known human geneticist called Cavalli Sforza. So in that paper in 1983, they have found two different models of modern human origins. One is out of Africa, the other is out of East Asia. The difference is whether they would use the molecular clock model. If they assume the molecular clock to be true, then the high genetic diversity of Africans would be interpreted to mean out of Africa. However, if they do not consider the molecular clock to be true, then they get the alternative hypothesis, which is out of East Asia. So, so that shows you the molecular clock hypothesis is critical to which origin model you're going to get. So Wallace was one of the authors on that paper. He later commented in a Newsweek article, and he said the same point, that it's all dependent on the assumptions. So now, many years later, we know the molecular clock was indeed a false hypothesis. And it has now been replaced by alternative models like relaxed molecular clock model, which just says that different species have different mutation rates.
Interesting. No, Professor. This is the article I really wanted to talk about, and it's quite similar to the one we discussed earlier. Transmission between archaic and modern human ancestors during the evolution of the oncogenic human papilloma virus 16. This is the article.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one that I really wanted you to talk about.
Oh, you want to talk about it more?
Yeah, because yes, that's the one that I really liked, because there's a similar article, the oncogenic HPV types, but it's the one that's from Oxford. That's the one that you really wanted to talk about, because you were talking about that quite frequently on social media.
So that paper, so HPV-16, there's a phylogenetic tree of this virus.
Before you
It turns
continue,
out
phylogenetic, what is that for those who don't know? Phylogenetic.
phylogenetic tree is just the genealogical relationship tree. You know, it's who is related to whom, who is closer to whom. You know, it's a branching tree of evolutionary tree. So it's some trees are built by morphological characters. A phylogenetic tree, on the other hand, is built by DNA sequence or
What do
protein
you mean
sequence.
by morphology?
Morphology is phenotype.
Okay.
Yeah. So a tree of HPV virus I was discussing, we think it supports the out of East Asia theory, but not the out of Africa theory. So that's the point I was trying to
Okay.
say.
And why? Why is this so?
Because the European types of the virus is called A1 to A3, and Asian type is called A4, and the African type is called B2. Okay, and there are others, but mostly B2. If you look at the genetic relationship of the three types, you will notice that the Asian type is located in between or in the middle. So it's closest to European type, but not to it's closer to European, and it is also close to African type. However, the European type is closer to East Asian rather than European, supporting the idea that the European type directly derived from the Asian type. And so this does not support the idea that Europeans derive directly from Africans migrating into Europe. So that was the rationale.
Good points. I am interested in the implications of this argument because I want to know how it aids our understanding of human development and intelligence out of Africa. So, during our correspondence using email, there was a point that I was raising. If the out of Africa theory is flawed, what are the implications for you? Well, I would say then the retrospective implications then for human development and intelligence. Let me simplify. Some writers, scientists, they have said that proximity to Africa is associated with lower intelligence levels, lower novelty seeking ability. So I was wondering if the out of Africa thesis is flawed, how should we then explain lower developmental levels in Africa? That's the question. Because in economics, there's the school of thought that argued that first origins regions that are closer to the first settlement are often less developed. If humans emerged in Africa, then Africa's relative poverty is not so surprising. Well, I should not have said the word humans, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
life
So
really
yeah.
emerged in East Asia, then why is Africa so poor? That's what I'm basically saying. Because if
Right.
Africa is
So
not the first point of settlement, then it should be better off. So please, what's going on here? I would love to
yeah.
understand
So
that.
first of all, the hypothesis proposed by some professors saying that the origin place should be less developed because people who migrated out from the origin place into other places, they may be more innovative and things like that. So that hypothesis, I think, remains a speculation, controversial. There are data inconsistent with this hypothesis. For example, people in periphery places in Asia, in East Asia, for example, people in Oceanian islands, they are not developed at all relative to mainland East Asia. And so doesn't mean, so this means just because you are a group that migrated from the central places, you are not necessarily more innovative and should have higher developed cultures. And
Yeah.
and also the origin place, the people who first evolve into modern humans, they should be, by definition, more advanced
Yes.
in cognition, in phenotypes, in modern traits. So they should have a higher development in culture and in civilization, right? At the time when they first appeared. And then they started migrating out to other places. If other places have no indigenous people, there will be no admixture with local people. Then you can sort of imagine that the people who moved out may have some advantage in developments because they encounter new challenges, new environments, and develop new civilizations.
Well,
That work. However, that's not the case in real world because when humans first appeared in one place like East Asia, you also have contemporaneous people in other places in Asia, in Europe, in Africa. So, and then it's well known that admixture between different people will happen. Like modern humans have hybridized with Neanderthals and Denisovans. Therefore, we would expect the modern humans who migrated into Africa would have hybridized with archaic people in Africa. And we know admixture of this nature would lead to uh, less, led to a dilution of modern traits, right? Rather
right.
than led to even more advanced hybridized humans. So in this case, we can say, people who migrated into Africa and hybridized, the progeny of the hybridization may have lower uh, less human traits and less cognitive capacity, and therefore less development in culture.
Okay. So so we are on the path to resolving this paradox, but I want you to go back to the earlier example when you contrasted East Asians to indigenous people. So I posed a question and you said, well, interesting point, but this example can overturn what you have said. And you shared the contrasting experiences of East Asians and you compared them to an indigenous group. Name the indigenous group again first, please.
Name the indigenous group.
Yeah, because you
Oh,
were saying that migration from the first settlement does not
yeah, yeah.
always
So
make
the
people
indigenous
smarter
group.
than you
How
think.
about those people in Oceania,
Yeah, exactly.
like Papua in New
Yes,
Guinea? They do not have advanced culture.
yes. And
Yeah.
tell us about their migration pattern. So where they
The
migrate?
migration pattern, I think they may come from Denisovan lineage.
No, in terms of because I said that if you migrated away from the first settlement, you should be better off. And then you gave the example of Asian people and the indigenous people. So I was one who migrated first.
Um, so the modern humans, according to our hypothesis, originated in East Asia, of course, in the East Asian mainland.
Yes.
And
Oh,
so the periphery, like Southeast Asia or
I get what
Northeastern,
you're saying. It's clear now. It's quite clear. So you no longer need to explain. So some peripheral groups, they're not as advanced as the mainland East Asian. So I get what you're saying. It's clearer. It's clearer now. Yeah, because the people who are not in East Asia, they would have migrated, but they're not as advanced as mainland East Asia. Okay, good.
yeah,
It's clear now.
okay, good.
Yes, it's clear. I just wanted to clear that up for our listeners because on this show, we don't special as you can see, we don't specialize in propaganda. We deal with truth and our conversation it is not a debate. So there are some people they think that the interviewer should interrogate the guest. No, that's not my position. My position is to allow us both to come to a position of reason and evidence using the available data. So if
Right.
I disagree with you, I will just say well, This article made a different point. If you feel like it, you can comment. If you don't, we move on. But it's, as the interviewer, it is not my role to engage in a debate. This is not a debate, it's a conversation.
That was a good position.
Yes,
Good.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of people today in media, they, well, I used to think that some journalists were disingenuous, or probably they were in the business of propaganda. They wanted to make more money. But these days, I have a view that's simple. My position is that many journalists are obviously dumb and low IQ.
I know. I agree.
Yeah, I think that they're literally dumb. They're not smart at all.
Right.
They're not bright. They're not bright. That's why.
Too many journalists are not in it for the
Exactly.
truth.
Exactly. It's just like the New Yorker. So there are people who are writing for prestigious publications today, and they are shocked that IQ is heritable. We have known this for some time though. That's no longer debatable.
Hmm. Good.
Yeah, so it's like they're forcing themselves to believe things that are not true. But
Right.
I have a theory that I'm thinking about. I'm not a scientist at all. My qualifications are in history, and I studied IR and some economics. But this is what I've been thinking about. The point of origin hypothesis, I think, is quite compelling. There's somebody called Ola Olson. He's an economist, not an evolutionary scientist, and there's a professor called Edward Miller. So Edward Miller is a finance professor who writes on intelligence, and he has written on. He has some unpublished papers. I did not read his unpublished papers, but he wrote a paper recently on intelligence, and he cited his unpublished papers, and his ideas complement what I have been saying about migration out of the first settlement and people who migrate being smarter. But what you have said is equally interesting. So this is my resolution. The first the first humans who were closest to us, those humans, they emerged in East Asia. That's what you're saying, right?
Right.
Good, good, good. The first humans emerged in East Asia, and to be simple, we're going to say life. Then life, human like life forms. That's Africa. But the first humans emerged in East Asia. So based on this information, if the first humans emerge in East Asia, then there is no longer a paradox, and the idea about Africa being undeveloped, it still stands, because if the most evolved people emerge first in East Asia and not Africa, then the
Yes. Yes.
there's no longer a paradox. There's a
No
resolution.
paradox. I
Yeah,
think it makes much more sense with the reality for the East Asia model than for the out of Africa model.
yes. So exactly, because if originally the first truly advanced, really intelligent people who were like us, they were in East Asia, then we would
Yeah.
understand why Africa is the way it is, because
Yeah.
the more
Exactly.
complicated groups, they would have migrated from Africa and evolved elsewhere. Because before getting an appropriate understanding of this issue, I was saying to myself, okay, then, so humanity emerged in Africa. There's now the out of Asia hypothesis. So I am wondering if perhaps the people who were in Africa, if they had suffered from various bottlenecks. Let's say they were in Africa for a long time, but no great development took place. So something happened to those people in Africa, so they didn't advance sufficiently. That was my original idea, because I wanted to understand the link between migration, evolutionary patterns, and cognitive development.
Hmm.
But it's quite clearer to us now why Africa is the way it is, and the earlier studies showing a link between proximity to Africa and low levels of innovation. These studies are still relevant, because what we're discussing in Africa is, let's in simple terms, human life. What we're discussing in East Asia is complexity. So it makes more sense now.
Good. If it makes sense to you, that's great to hear. And
Yeah,
yeah, feel free to ask me any questions that
yeah, of course,
feel
yes.
like it doesn't make
Yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah. So there's this article I read some time ago. I'm looking for the name of the article. I don't remember the name as yet, but it's about sub-Saharan Africans having a relatively higher share of Asian DNA.
Right.
Asian DNA.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there is writer Ming. I read Ming, who is a writer. He writes on intelligence, and I am wondering if there is a correlation between ancient DNA and low IQ.
Yes. Uh, uh, I'm not sure it has been directly
Yeah, it's
studied,
not
and
direct; it's just tentative. But I'm wondering
yeah,
if
tentative.
there
It's
is.
a hypothesis. Definitely would make sense because we generally consider ancient people to be less developed, less intelligent than more recent people, and also the ancient DNA or archaic people, they generally carry more ancestral traits and more ancestral DNA or alleles. By more ancestral means they are similar. Those traits and those alleles are more like our ancestor, like chimpanzees. So you can say that archaic people or ancient people, they carry more chimpanzee-like alleles than present-day people. So the fact that you carry more ancestral alleles already means that you will be more primitive, more uh, and more ancestral, less derived, less evolved.
Ah,
So,
yes.
so yeah. So in
Stop
that
the
case,
point.
if you
Professor
have,
Shi, I just want to list the article. Recovering signals of ghost archaic introgression in African populations. We provide complementary lines of evidence for archaic introgression into four West African populations. Our analysis of site frequency spectra indicate that these populations derive 2 to 19% of their genetic ancestry from an archaic population that diverged before the split of Neanderthals and modern humans by Arun Der
yeah,
Basula.
yes,
Go.
I know that paper is quite famous now. Yes, I'm not sure exactly the number would be exactly accurate, but the message that African may have more archaic DNA is not surprising and would be consistent with them being less developed in culture.
Yes,
It
interesting.
makes sense.
Yes, like there's this writer, a scientist, David Pfeiffer. He wrote a piece recently to corroborate the argument of David Sun. So David Sun, another researcher, who published an article on the East Asian personality, and David Pfeiffer went delved in depth to prove David Sun's article, and that David Pfeiffer found a really interesting finding. He found that Africans were less agreeable. They were less
Hmm.
agreeable than the
Hmm.
people. Many of the traits that were more prevalent in Africa are what we would call negative traits.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, so they're not they weren't agreeable. They're being like Steve. Some would say that Steve Jobs was disagreeable. Really exceptional people are disagreeable because they have the potential, but on average, if a group ranks quite low or lower than other groups in agreeableness, and that group doesn't do too well in the arena of IQ, that's a negative. That's not a positive any at all.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's
Yeah,
yeah. So
because I'm
that,
interested in personality. differences and how they affect human
I
diversity.
know
So
those topics are kind of sensitive.
yeah, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
they're kind of
So
sensitive,
I
but
I would refrain from discussing
yeah,
too much about
I
those.
don't blame you. I don't blame you. At
Yeah,
least I'm not white.
yeah. So in that way, it's you're very special.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So these days I've been reading a lot of old books written in the 1900s, late 19th century, a lot of old books, and I'm finding that it's not fortunate, it's unfortunate, but many statistics they have not changed any at all, which is quite bad. So if writers who were writing on productivity in the early 20th century, their findings we can map them on to present findings. There isn't a big disparity, and I find
Right.
that to be quite
Yeah.
troubling. If you were to do a research to examine the consistency of personality traits, stereotypes, and IQ figures, it would be quite devastating because much has not changed. And I started this I started this research because usually when you're studying, you're taught that pre contemporary writers were racist people. So they were
Right.
studying skulls and personality because they were racist. And
Yeah.
I've been reading a number of books, and that's not my opinion. Based on what I've been reading, many of these writers were troubled by their findings. They were quite troubled because if their findings are true, it means that it's going to be difficult to assimilate some groups into society.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they were
There.
troubled. And what I also discovered is that many of these writers were really critical of racialist arguments, and they went out of their way to ensure that the data sets were comparable. So if they were studying differences in productivity, they ensure that the groups being studied were quite similar. So they would, let's say, for example,
Yeah.
study black Americans who were living a productive state to white Americans who were really poor because they wanted to ensure that the
Yeah.
data did not disenfranchise
Yeah.
blacks. And
Yeah.
many of their studies found that when even you control for all of these positive variables, some groups did not farm well. So these days I don't see many people doing research on farming and why agriculture is more productive in some places versus others. But I have this I have become quite interested in that data farming and what makes people good farmers and why some groups don't farm particularly well. It
Hmm.
sounds stereotypical at first, but when you dug quite deep into literature, you realize that okay, there is something that we can study.
Yeah.
But
So
what are
yeah,
you working on now? Do you have any recent papers?
recent papers on what?
Yeah. You if you have any recent papers on genetics and evolution.
I have a this year. I have a review paper on the maximum genetic diversity theory.
Okay. So tell us you can talk about it.
Well, it's mostly a review paper, so not too many new concepts.
And
So
you have written books or contributed articles to various books, right?
uh, yeah, a number of books,
Yeah, there's
but
this one you wrote something in a book, evolution and I'm going to look at it on your website. Evolution and development. What's the name of that book that you edited or wrote? But it was a pretty
that
good
was
book.
a chapter. I listed some books, not directly written by me. Some it's mostly
Yes.
the books are written by other people regarding our theory.
Yeah, let me look for it so I can just point my listeners to it. So when my eyes are moving, it's because I'm looking for information online. Ah, MWO, Development and Evolution Revisited.
Right. So she wrote a chapter in that book series about our theory. Yes.
Development and Evolution. And you are a member of a group called the Third Way of Evolution. What's that about?
Yes. Oh, those are a group of professors, scholars who find the Darwinian theory incomplete. All of them agrees that Darwinian theory is a good theory in terms of a microevolution or small scale changes during evolution. Darwinian theory explains very well the survival of the organisms, and however they disagree with the idea that the same mechanism operating in small scale evolution is also the same mechanism that operates for the big changes or macro evolution. And there might be alternative mechanisms. And so we try to come up with alternative models for macro evolution.
All right, then. The intelligent this design in the context of a theory, not creationism. No, I'm not talking about creationism because there are people who propose intelligent design who are not religious any at all. They're not Bible. They don't read the Bible. They're not creationist. What do you think about intelligent design as a theory? Is it plausible any at all?
Uh, I'm more interested in the actual mechanisms for how evolution happens. At this point, I'm not excluding any possible causes. So I don't see any evidence at this point to exclude a particular cause. In general, I think it's not logical to propose random force to account for the occurrence of order. Okay, so intuitively, random activity is supposed to disrupt order, not to create order. So we do see that during evolution, based on our new analysis of genetic diversity pattern, that with evolution going from simple to more complex life forms, we see a reduction in genetic diversity of the organism can tolerate. So genetic diversity is a measure of randomness. So a reduction of randomness during evolution is actual phenomenon. And what we need to explain this phenomenon. So there are two possibilities. One is the reduction in randomness is caused by randomness itself. Alternatively, it is caused by anti-random force. So we don't have evidence either way yet, but just from intuitive logic, it doesn't make sense for randomness to create order. That's
But
my
what's interesting about Darwinian evolution is that when Darwin introduced his theory, many of the people who endorsed it were Christians. Many
yeah.
Christians endorsed it, and some of the people who were vehement critics were not Christians.
Hmm.
That's
Interesting. Yeah.
that's quite interesting with Darwinian evolution.
Yeah, I would say, if you're religious people with a religious mindset, to believe Darwinism is also sort of a religion. you have to believe that you have to be you basically believing a God who creates a world by throwing a dice. You know,
Oh,
so
yes.
so both atheism and religion attract the same kind of people who are more religious in their mindset, in their heart.
All right. All right. So thanks for coming on. Speaking to you has been a pleasure, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to enjoy the show because it was interesting, and we didn't say anything that was too controversial.
That's good. Yeah,
All right.
thank you for this opportunity. I enjoy the discussion, and you are very special and great, great work.
You're so
Thank you.
kind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.